why build a chessboard in a week?
It all starts with this kid, my youngest son. He recently became chess obsessed through this little app here, and being one to always take it to the next level, he asked a simple question. Do we have a chess set? And in case you're wondering, no, we don't have one. Now, I'd been wanting a new end table for our living room for a while, and hey, an integrated chessboard on a pedestal base seemed like the perfect project. But here's the catch. I have less than a week left of holidays, a bunch of family activities already planned, and my son wants that chessboard now. So off to the shop I went. Now, I knew the first step was to create the 8x8 chessboard grid, and I figured the easiest way to do that would be to make some thin wood veneers and then take them over to my Acmer laser and cut them out. It did so quickly and easily, and before I knew it, I had 64 curly maple and African mahogany squares ready to be glued onto a stable substrate. Here I'm using my table saw fence to align the edges of the squares, and I'm connecting them together using green painter's tape. Then I needed to wrestle some 1/2-inch MDF through the table saw to glue the chessboard pattern to. That's going to keep everything from shifting and moving around with humidity and temperature changes. So I just stacked them all up and applied some glue and set them in place, taping it down to the MDF board. Right here is when I should have known that there was a problem. You can see me trying to figure out, is there something under the board that's making it rock like this? No, the 1/2-inch MDF was actually already warped, and that would cause me significant problems later on. But for now, blissfully unaware, I took the 3 rows that I had done first and put them into a vac bag that I picked up a while back that's meant for skateboards. Used my vacuum to get most of the air out before using the hand pump that came with this inexpensive kit to get the rest of the air out. Then a couple hours later, I finished off the whole process and everything went back into the vac bag for another couple of hours. While that glue set up, I started to prepare some stock for some edge strips that I wanted to go along the chessboard just to make it look really pretty. I also planned to engrave chess coordinates on those strips, which would make things just extra fancy. So after milling and cutting down these strips, I cleaned up all of my parts with a hand plane, something that I recommend to everyone to do. It is the most cathartic and rewarding experience to have a well-tuned hand plane and learn how to use it. After that, I glued it all together, and once everything was clamped up, it was time to check on our previous glue up.
You said beetle.
As I took it over to the drum sander, at this point I really should have noticed a problem coming about, but still hadn't noticed, and it is going to kick me in the butt later on. But for now, I grabbed my track saw and I used it to clean up the edges of the chessboard. With that done and the previous glue up ready to go, I removed the clamps and just cleaned up the edge with the hand plane once again. This might have been more of an excuse just to play around with my hand plane some more than actually a necessity, but it really was beautiful seeing these multicolored shavings coming off. Then it was over to the bandsaw to cut some thin strips, use the drum sander to get them down to size, and then I engraved my coordinates very carefully on them before matching them up to the edge of the chessboard. A neat trick I figured out for doing mitered corners with a chisel: look at the reflection in the back of the chisel, try to make it look like a right angle, and you'll be good to go. Of course, after doing this, I gave up and decided to go over to the sander. Got all those pieces cut down before taking a break from that to grab some walnut and cut it down to size. Here, we're making the material for our pedestal base. I'm using Titebond Dark here just so that I don't have any really visible glue lines. Then once everything was in clamps, I could go back to what I was doing before and finish gluing on that edging. Off camera, I had cut down some of this African mahogany I'd been saving for quite a while and got it all fitted up so that it could be glued to the board. You'll see earlier there that I had some shims for the board. That was just to try to minimize the amount that I would end up sanding into the veneer. Doing this was very important to me because while I hadn't caught it on camera, I finally ended up figuring out there was an issue. Notice how none of my engraved coordinates are on the edge stripping anymore? Yeah, that would be because everything ended up coming through the drum sander a little bit crooked, and by the time that I got it all fixed, there was very little room left on my veneers. Of course, with my hurry to fix one problem, I caused another problem in that I glued everything up before I had actually cut in my drawer openings and drawer fronts. So I decided, hey, never too late to use a track saw and put a couple cuts in strategic locations, finish everything up with a hand saw, and just use the size of the kerf as my drawer reveal. One of the things I really enjoyed about this project was getting to sort through my bins of offcuts and other small pieces to find what I needed. And here I was able to dig out a chunk of poplar that I had been given to use as the drawer sides and backs for these drawers, and I ended up with just, and I mean just enough to make both of them. Now, I know not everyone who watches these videos is a woodworker, but if you are, what are your rules for what offkeps get kept and which ones are thrown away? That is, if you have any rules. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments because, frankly, my supply is starting to overflow even after using this much material for this project. Here we are past the 7-minute mark of this video, and I'm thinking that must mean that you're enjoying what you're seeing. Either that, or you fell asleep and you haven't realized the video is playing through, which honestly is fine too, whatever works to get more watch time. But seriously, if you are awake and enjoying this, I'd really appreciate it if you would like the video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. I know you hear this in every video on YouTube, but doing so really does help out the channel, and it helps motivate me to keep putting in the hours to make these videos for your enjoyment. I make no claims to know what I'm doing when it comes to wood turning, but I feel like a pedestal base needs to be a turned spindle. Of course, it needs to be a few inches longer than my lathe was, so I cut the material in half, turned the first half off camera, and now you're seeing me turn down the other half, sped up to keep this interesting since, let's be honest, it's a spindle. I mean, it's a nice looking one that fits almost perfectly with the first half of the spindle. I'm pretty proud of that, but it's still a spindle nonetheless. Hey, that brings up an interesting question. What do you think of wood turning content on YouTube? Are you interested in it, or is it totally boring to you? If you like it, start your comment with turned. And if you don't, start your comment with square. If I see you start your comment with either turned or square, I'll know you've been watching, and I'll try to make sure that I respond to all of your comments with a digital high five. Now, this brought us to day 3, which meant that vacation was quickly coming to an end, and I needed to get this thing done. So I shaped up this pedestal base using a combination of tools, this block plane. It was a lot of work, but very satisfying when everything came to an end to put all this together this way. And I mean, you just can't compare using hand tools to using a sander. Just so much more pleasant to use these hand tools, and I think that it came out looking great. Time was getting really short on my vacation. Day 5 of working on this project. I decided some modifications were needed to the base. It needed to just have a little bit more oomph to it, so I cut another wider but thinner piece to glue onto the end and gave it a little bit of a chamfer here, which you can see me doing over at the router table. Then I glued and screwed both of the pieces together, and after doing so, allowed it to dry up before smoothing some transitions and applying a little bit of finish. We're getting pretty close to the end of the project here. I wanted to add some leveling feet to this. You know, no one's floors are completely flat, so you can spend a whole lot of time trying to get everything perfect, and it still is going to rock depending on the surfaces they're in. So I had just picked up some inexpensive leg levelers and put those on here, and then secured the base to the pedestal just really quickly with a very, very long screw before moving over to some 3D printed drawer slides that I had created. They quickly and easily got attached with some screws, and then I grabbed another piece of scrap, I think this is cherry, and just cut it down and then grooved it out to go in the center of the underside of the chess table. Really what this is for is to space everything out and give me a good mounting surface to connect the pedestal base to the actual tabletop itself. And so we have to glue this into position. I made sure that it was perfectly centered on the tabletop itself and then weighted it down and allowed it to dry. With time being short while that was drying, I didn't want to waste any of that time and quickly routed grooves on the drawer sides to ride along those drawer slides that I had integrated there. And then about an hour or two later, it seemed like a really good time to start applying some hard wax oil as my finish. And so I applied it to the underside and then to the top of the chessboard and the drawers and everything like that. I did end up adding some felt to the inside of the drawers, but I didn't get that done in time for the actual building of this thing. I decided the way that I would go is I would drill things out for a post, glue things together, but to hold it all down and hold it in place, I also wanted to use these figure 8 clips. I figured it would be like building in my own sort of clamping system. And so I just eyeballed it using a square like you can see there, got everything decently connected. I also decided to use some hide glue for this just in case anything ever went wrong. You're supposed to be able to reverse hide glue. Never done it, but apparently that works. And after that, a couple screws in there, letting it set up, sliding in the drawers to either side with some chess pieces that I picked up off Amazon. Then all that was left was a couple of finishing touches, taking it back inside the house, getting some final shots, and playing chess with my son.